I've got a question for you. Have you ever had the urge to just get away from it all? Yes. And I don't just mean a week on the beach in Bali. I mean really get away from it all. No phones, no computers, no to-do lists, no music, no running hot water, no fridges, no electricity, not even matches. Perhaps like me, you imagined one day walking out the office door and not stopping until the city streets turned to leaf litter under your feet, until you found yourself surrounded by a grove of ancient trees and you lay your back on the sun-kissed earth and knew that there was nowhere you had to go and nothing you had to do for an entire year. Can you imagine? Yeah, maybe. Essentially, that's what I did when I signed up as one of 6 people for Australia's first independent wilderness studies program on the north coast of New South Wales. While part of the program was about learning these Indigenous survival skills, it wasn't ever going to be Survivor, not Bear Grylls. It was as much about observing the changing face of ourselves and the bush over 4 full seasons. A chance at really having a simple life. It was an experience that changed my life in ways that I'm still discovering. And I'd like to share some of the story with you today. But I'm sure some of you are back there thinking about, could I really do this without matches? And why? So to explain a bit about why, I'll take you back into my office. And imagine me lying on the floor of the office, staring up at the computer that's flashing screensaver pictures of a forest. It's a forest that I'm campaigning to protect, but I've never actually stepped foot in. The phone rings and I can see it's the media, but I don't answer it. I've got nothing left to give. At the time, I was a campaigner for the Wilderness Society, and protecting forests and the environment had been a passion of mine for the better part of a decade. But that consuming passion had begun to consume me. I was growing ever more tired, burnt out, and starting to question what I was doing, because what I could see was that the underlying cause of our ecological crisis was this separation that humans have from nature. I could talk till the cows come home with all the facts and statistics I had, but without a relationship with the natural world, nothing was going to move people to act or change. And I knew that because I was starting to feel it in myself, this sense of disconnection from the places that once inspired me. But it wasn't just the job, it was just the busyness of life. This feeling of I ticked one thing off the to-do list and another thing took its place. I'm sure you know how that feels. This kind of relentless onwardsness of everything. I sometimes felt like an iceberg. Just the tip of me above the surface was all that was visible to me and others, while the bulk of my potential lay underneath the surface, buried under a sea of busyness. I had a deep yearning to discover and explore the uncharted depths below the surface, but how? Around that time, an email popped into my inbox, a short course in nature philosophy and awareness skills. So those first few days where I spent sleeping in a bed of leaf litter, cooking bush food over a fire, looking up at the stars, sharing stories with others, trying to make fire without matches, I felt more alive than I could remember in years. So when the idea of the year-long program came up, it really felt like a decision that had already been made for me. I knew I was going to do that year. That was the inspiration. Then came reality. And reality bites when you move into the forest in the middle of summer. We're talking march flies, mozzies, midgies, ants, leeches. They all wanted a piece of me from the moment I moved in. Add to that the jackhammer roar of cicadas in my ear and the humidity so thick I was swimming, and I was seriously trying to remember why. The first lesson that we learnt was the sacred order of survival. Shelter, water, fire, and then food. So, shelter. Our mission was to build our own individual shelters from scratch with materials just found on the land to keep us dry in torrential rain and warm in sub-zero temperatures. Now, I'm not the world's most practical lass. I've always been outdoorsy, but never what you'd call handy. So it was slightly daunting. I started with the only structure I could visualize, a leaning roof that I thought I'd just put paper bark over. Simple. So this was my lean-to in the end, but my goodness, it taught me the first lesson that simplicity is deceptively complex. After 6 weeks and 3 layers of paper bark, I finally had a relatively waterproof kitchen. Then I was to move on to my real shelter. My real shelter I always imagined to be round. So I decided to stop making the shortcuts and just thatch it with grass bundle by bundle. It felt like I'd walked into the Zen koan of chop wood, carry water. I had to slow down. Things take the time that they take. And when I finally finished that beautiful shelter, it felt like I'd been living that koan where meditation is life and life is meditation. And it was my first ever home and I absolutely loved it. But having the cutest hobbit home in the Shire was only the first step to feeling at home. I really felt like an alien in a foreign landscape. Our bird language instructor changed all that. He said, I'm going to teach you one skill crucial for wilderness survival, and all you have to do is sit. Find one place that calls to you, he said. Know it by day, know it by night, know it in the wind and the rain. Know the birds that live there and the trees they live in. Know where the stars and the 4 directions are. Know these things as if they are your relatives, which in time they will become. So this place was a sit spot. And when I found my sit spot on the root ball of an upturned tree, I felt like a forest princess. And I'd go there every day for at least an hour and just sit, just watch, just observe. And suddenly, the world around me came alive. The birds that had been background music all my life suddenly took shape and colour and personality. There was soap operas going on around me, territorial skirmishes, family dramas. It was way more interesting than TV. Binoculars became part of my uniform just as much as my knife. And really, that sit spot opened up the doors of the forest, and I was in this magical land where I could see giant forest owls kidnapping parrots and possums by moonlight, where wrens were weaving spiders' webs into their nests. It was really a magical land that I walked into and slowly began to turn the pages of the book of nature. Of course, not all creatures were that friendly. One night I woke to find a snake trying to get into my mosquito net, and other times there was dog prints larger than my hand near my shelter. But I dived into the whole project of earth skills, matchless fire making, water purification, hunting and gathering, primitive hide tanning, basketry, pottery, rope and string making, flint napping, bird language, awareness, tracking. It was endless. There was just something that felt so right about learning these skills, about learning how to thrive on the land, how to feel like it was home as well as anywhere else. There seemed to be also a promise in these skills that if I could whittle down my life to just the elemental essentials, if my job description was earth, air, fire and water, then I could somehow whittle down to find the essence of myself again beneath all the society's distractions and layers. Of course, finding food was one of those challenges. And one thing I liked about these skills was I didn't want to be bubble wrapped by society anymore. Even though it wasn't easy or comfortable a lot of the time, and I was bitten up and scratched and sometimes just really wanted a hot shower, there was just something about the realness of knowing the world through my senses, the soot on my skin, the icy shock of the creek on a winter's day. And food was another part of that mission of really wanting to know life from scratch. I didn't want the polystyrene meat on a packet anymore. And I was certainly harvesting bush food every day, so this water lily was a good stir fry. But when it finally came time for me to hunt, And when I carried that lifeless body of a wallaby back from the snare trap, it was one of the hardest moments of my life, but also one of the most amazing, because in that process of honouring that animal, turning its hide into clothing, eating it, the sinew to string, really honouring that life, in confronting death, it's probably the first time I really saw the gift of life. And in that violence, there was also such beauty. It was definitely a huge moment in that year. But the skill that taught me the most about myself was fire. When I first saw a woman make a fire with just one stick on one stick in the Indigenous Australian method, I was blown away. I wanted it badly. So, going with the saying of the greater the need, the greater the result, I decided to only light fires the whole year without matches, just with fire by friction. But 3 months in, and all I had made was a whole load of smoke and blood blisters the size of 20-cent coins on both palms. Luckily, I did have a backup method, which was bow drill, a Native American method with a bow and a string, so I could still have cups of tea and sit by the fire at night, although my tea addiction did really die down after a while. But it was this hand drill method that I wanted more than anything. So one night I was trying, and the harder I tried, this is the thing, the harder I tried, the further from my grasp it seemed to be. It just didn't make sense. One night I failed again and I threw my kit and swore at it, and then I thought, let's try something different. I tied a blindfold around my eyes, and instead of concentrating on how far I was along the road to getting a fire, I just felt the stalk moving between my palms. And I concentrated on the smell of the smoke and on the wood dust grinding down on wood. And I heard it hit the sweet spot. And when I took my blindfold off, there was a coal waiting for me. And this is what fire taught me: to give something my absolute passion, but not striving, not pushing. To allow it, to want it more than anything. Enjoy the journey, and don't get so hung up on the destination. And there's me blowing up the bundle into flame. So fire was a best friend of mine through winter. And winter is really when I kind of rolled down my thatch shutters for hibernation and said goodbye to the others and really went into a period of solitude which I've been craving for years. And I did a lot of walking in that time. I just wanted to walk the land, but not with this kind of walking from A to B mentality that I used to go bushwalking, but with this sense of just being curious. Where was I going to be led? Letting my feet take me on a journey. And it was really sometimes an edge, going off trail and thinking I'd be lost. But there was it was like an art form, this sense of wandering. But the other place I was wandering in winter was my internal landscape. And without the others around in this period of solitude, I really was confronted with parts of myself that I didn't normally see. I became aware of this judge and this self-critic that was constantly asking me, what are you doing, and is it enough, and have you practiced this skill yet, or this skill? It was crazy. There was nothing I had to do, but I was still driven and writing to-do lists in my journal. I came to see how conditioned we are to always be doing and striving and be productive. And the forest refused to hold up that social identity, and so it started crumbling around me. And I would ask myself, well, who am I without my names and labels? Without something to show for my day? Who am I really? It took me on a bit of an underworld journey, like a caterpillar in a cocoon turning to mush, and I had to just trust that I would emerge with some butterfly wings. That's a winter night in my shelter. I absolutely loved those winter nights. They were magical. So the question is, well, how have I changed? Well, one way of describing it is I'm still me, I'm just more of me. I feel like the forest kind of got rid of a lot of gunk that was on the surface so that I see myself more clearly, and I feel in my boots, feel in a sense of groundedness. Someone said to me once, the forest is in constant flow, and when you put yourself in an environment that's in flow, all the stuck places in yourself will seek to move. I thought it sounded nice, but in hindsight, I see that that's actually really what happened. I'm a lot more fluid these days, and I don't try and control my life so much. But just like my wanders, I trust that one foot in front of the other and follow that sense of wonder and curiosity in life. And one thing that I've learnt about myself during that year was to follow that sense of aliveness and to follow that call to the wild. And since sharing my story in my book, I've heard so many other people talk about this, feeling this call to the wild. And it's not just a call to reconnect with nature, but it's a call to find the wild within, the instinctive self, the intuitive self, and to be in that space of flow that the forest modelled to me so effortlessly. Recently, the Huffington Post published an article that said, "Nature reconnection is the next big human movement." And I'd like to think so. I feel like what we need is to re-inhabit that sense of intimacy with the natural world, with the wild world around us and the wild world within. I call this Rewilding the Soul, this movement. And it is about developing our unique relationship with the natural world. Because I truly believe that we all have a unique relationship with nature, that it's up to us to discover. I mean, it's the bulk of human history. It's just been part of our world, and now we're in this space where we're separate from that, but we can reclaim it. It doesn't need months or years. I find that even an afternoon spent wandering in a semi-wild place, even Centennial Park, it's enough to pick up the conversation and to reconnect with the more than human world. And I do feel like human potential can only be realised when we have that connection with the more than human world. It's a sense of having a wild mind, a wild spirit, a wild body. And we need wild minds if we're going to cultivate a wild earth. And that's certainly the place that I want to live. Thank you very much.
By the time we're 60, more than 90% of us will have known someone close to us who has suffered from some sort of a neurological disorder.
You all know you're not going to live forever. There's only one way into this life and one way out.
I cannot prove to you anymore that anything is possible.
Talk about the marvelous thing that we now understand about our brains.
It gets so much better.